welcome to grammar recap number 4. So in today's recap, we're only going to be going over lesson 7, and then the lesson after this will be lesson 8. So the topics covered in lesson 7 were verb forms part 1, which covered verb tense, and verb forms part 2, which covered the subjunctive mood. So what is verb tense and why is it important? Verbs change their form most importantly when they show the time and action when they show the time at which an action took place. The form that shows time is called tense. Here are the most important tenses and their forms and uses. So this chart I also showed in the previous recap. It was also in the very end of lesson 6, I believe, but I'll just be recapping this because it's very, very important and it gives examples and definitions of each of the 6 tenses we have. So first we have the present tense, which can be formed with is and a present participle. The little rules in the parentheses aren't always correct and they don't apply. They're correct, but they don't apply to every single scenario of the given tense. So just keep that in mind. It's just more of a hint or something that commonly occurs. So, for example, for present, the middle column here is all examples. So he is doing me a favor. He eats during his lesson. They are biking right now. So the present tense shows an action going on, a habitual action, or a general truth. The past can be formed with did plus the infinitive form of a verb. So examples would be I took my dog to the park, or did she tell the truth? The past tense shows an action occurring at some definite moment in the past. And this definite is important because we do have undefined later on. For the future tense, it can be formed with will plus the infinitive. For an example sentence would be we will not give up. And the future tense shows an action that is yet to occur. Next, we have the present perfect. I go more into detail about these last 3 specifically, but we have, has plus past participle, or been plus the present participle. Some example sentences would be, you have lost my trust. Lily has lived in this house for all her life, or we have been living in this house for all of Lily's life. The present perfect shows an action that happened in the past at an undefined time. It also shows an action begun in the past and continuing into the present. The past perfect can be formed with had plus a past participle. An example would be, by the time summer came, he had saved up a lot of money. The past perfect is used to show an action that occurred before another action, both occurring in the past. And then lastly, we have the future perfect tense. So an example sentence, it can be formed with will have plus the past participle of the verb. An example sentence would be, by the time summer comes, he will have saved up a lot of money. So the future perfect tense shows an action that will be completed by some specified future moment. So verb tense consistency. Keep your verb tenses consistent. Do not shift tense without reason in the middle of an account. It is normal to narrate events, fact or fiction, in the past tense since they must already have happened before they can be told. But sometimes for narrative impact, it works to tell a story in the present tense, but stick to the one you choose. So here we just have an example of verb consistency. So we have an original sentence here that reads, Larry loved Alyssa, followed her around, laughed at her jokes, and bought her pizza. But when at last he's alone with her, he doesn't know how to talk to her. So at first the sentence may seem correct and it seems to make sense, but what's incorrect here is that everything before the semicolon is in the past tense. We have loved, followed, laughed, bought, and then everything that's after is in the present tense. So he doesn't know what to do when at last he's alone with her. So in order to correct this sentence, we need consistency of our verb tenses. So there are 2 possible versions. There can be many more with all of the tenses, but I just have one sentence that's completely in the past and another sentence that's completely in the present because this sentence kind of merged the 2. So a correct version of the sentence would be, Larry loved Alyssa, followed her around, laughed at her jokes, and bought her pizza. But at last when he's alone with her, he didn't know how to talk to her. So now we have didn't here, which is correct because it agrees with the past tense I've been using throughout the entire sentence. So everything before the semicolon in this sentence in general didn't change from here. We just changed everything that followed the semicolon to agree with the past tense. Another correct version of the sentence would be to make every single verb in the present. So it would then read, Larry loves Alyssa, follows her around, laughs at her jokes, and buys her pizza. But when at last he's alone with her, he doesn't know how to talk to her. So it's basically just flip-flopped from the past correct sentence. So we kept everything following the semicolon the same, but everything before we changed all of the verbs that were previously in the past tense to the present tense. So we have loves, follows, laughs, and buys. So both of these sentences have verbs that are all in the same tense, and that's just, it kind of is, it leads by its name because verb consistency, we just need all verbs to be consistent with one tense. So now we're going to go through verb tenses, which is also just verb forms part 1, and all of their general rules. Again, I have very much more detailed examples in the full lesson 7 itself, so if you ever want more examples or to clear up some confusion, I recommend going out to read that. But rule number 1, summaries of events in literary works are usually given in the present tense. This is sometimes called the historical present. The plot of the work extends over a span of time, and focusing on a particular event, you can take it as the present moment. So this rule is very, very important, specifically when you're writing papers, because when you're talking about what a character did, say we're talking about what Macbeth did, and you're writing in your paper, you won't say it in the past tense or in the future. You always just talk about it in the given, you always talk about it in the present tense. So rule number 2, then earlier or later moments in the story will be put in relation to this present. And we're saying this present because, again, in rule number 1, summaries of events in literary works are usually given in the present tense. So Macbeth realizes, which is the present, that all of his friends have abandoned him, which is the past perfect. And then rule number 3, it is usually best to use the past tense when reporting what someone said. So when you're just talking about anyone, it doesn't have to be literary, it could just be like, oh, what Rachel said, then you would say you would say Rachel said, not Rachel says, because of course it had to be said for you to be reporting it. So there are a few more rules for verb tenses. So number 4, when stating an indirect statement and a generally accepted truth, you use the past tense. So an example would be, an incorrect sentence would read, Vanessa never learned that the world was round. So that's wrong because the generally accepted truth here is that the world is round. And here I even say it myself, it's is, which is the correct verb, because a generally accepted truth, the world is round, it's not a past thing, and it continues on. So then you would change it to the present tense. It would read, Vanessa never learned that the world is round because the world is still round. So that's why the second form of the sentence here is correct, and we don't use the past tense. This is supposed to say do not use the past tense. That's my mistake, but here are the examples. Follow the correct rule. It should be, when stating an indirect statement and generally accepted truth, you do not use the past tense. So rule number 5, use the present perfect tense to show an action began in the past but continuing into the present. So helping verbs can be has and have, and then I go into more depth with the present perfect on the next slide. And the tense is used to set a present state of affairs in relation to the origins of it in the past. So here, the sentence in the present perfect. Max, Abby, and Jonah have been biking and eating lunch together every Friday for 9 years now. The present perfect verb have been biking and eating fills in the span between 9 years ago and now being the present, and lets the reader know that they are still doing so today. So also now we're going to the past perfect. So used past perfect tense to show the earlier of 2 past actions, and the helping verb here is had. So by the time they were hungry, they finished volleyball practice. The problem with this sentence is the use of simple past tense for both events, and it makes them seem as if they're happening at the same time. I don't have the correct sentence pasted here because I believe I gone to a different sentence in the next slide, but it would, in order to correct this, you can say by the time they were hungry, they had finished volleyball practice. We put that helping verb had there to show which of the 2 past events happened before the earlier past event. So again, keep in mind in the past perfect, both actions you're discussing or all three are happening in the past, but then one of them obviously had to happen first. So like you wake up before you brush your teeth, before you eat breakfast. So they're all and now we're speaking from the nighttime perspective, and I'm talking if we're reflecting on this morning. It's still, we're talking about things that happened in the past, but when you're saying you had brushed my by the time I ate breakfast, I had brushed my teeth, because you brushed your teeth before you ate breakfast. So continuing with the past perfect, some judgment is needed when you apply this rule. If one says, I went to the pet shop and bought 3 fish, one of these actions must have been performed first, yet it is not important to sort them out carefully. That should say out, not are. Sorry about that. It is really a single event being described. And the last rule I have for verb tenses, aka verb forms part 1, and then and again act as time markers that make use of the past perfect unnecessary. Past perfect tense is most often used in an adverb clause. And then the last of the tenses that I'm going to be going over is the future perfect tense. So use the future perfect tense to set a future action in relation to another action still further in the future. So the helping verb for the future perfect tense is will have. So with the use of the future perfect tense, you are transferring your point of view from now to some moment yet to come, and from there looking back on an action to be performed in the intervening time. So again, because it's a bit confusing, I don't have examples in the recap lesson right now, but there are examples specifically for the future perfect tense in lesson 7. I recommend checking that out. But for now, we're going to move on to practice sentences with verb forms part 1, aka verb tense, so you guys can get a general good idea of everything we've discussed so far. So in sentence number 1, Oliver never told a lie before he turned 2. You would have Oliver had never told a lie before he turned 2. And that would make this the past perfect because we have the helping verb had. Sentence number 2 reads, Otto said that amoebas were one-celled animals. So this is relating to our rule regarding the generally accepted truth. We can confirm, or we can just all agree that amoebas to this day are one-celled animals. Nothing has changed. If it's saying something is a mammal and it still is a mammal, or a general truth, or just like really like any fact that still remains true, then you would use the present tense. So instead of were, you would have are, and the sentence would read, Otto said that amoebas are one-celled animals. Sentence number 3, Mrs. Klein is living in the same apartment for the last 30 years. It would be, Mrs. Klein has been living in the same apartment for the last 30 years. So we have this ongoing activity or this ongoing event, and then so we're going to have has been instead of is living because we have that for the last 30 years there in the sentence. Sentence number 4, believing that she fed her children already, Melissa prepared no dinner. So this rule has this sentence has 2 actions that are both occurring in the past. So then it would be the past perfect. It would read, believing that she had fed her children already, Melissa prepared no dinner. And then lastly, sentence number 5, Jack told the reporters that he will not apologize to her. Jack told the reporters that he would not apologize to her would be the correct form of the sentence. So now moving on to verb forms part 2. There's a lot of rules for this, so we're going to try to get through it and without any confusion. And again, I recommend checking out lesson number 7 if there is any confusion. So rule number 1, the subjunctive mood is used to state a hypothetical situation or to express a wish, a demand, or a suggestion. So this is actually just the definition of the subjunctive mood. It's not exactly a rule, but again, I'll just read it again. The subjunctive mood is used to state a hypothetical situation or to express a wish, a demand, or a suggestion. Sentence number 2, in a noun clause expressing a request, the verb takes the form of the infinitive without to. Rule number 3, such a noun clause will always begin with that and will be either the direct object of a verb like request or a positive to a noun meaning the same thing. Rule number 4, in a noun clause expressing a wish, substitute the following forms. So these are the following forms. We have a fact column and a wish column. So instead of, not instead of, it's just where you have I am, he, she, it is, it would be I were, he, she, it were. I, he, she, it was would be I, he, she, it had been. I have, she, he, she, it has. I had, he, she, it had. I, he, she, it had. I had had, he, she, it had had. I go, he, she, it goes. I would go, he, she, it would go. Sorry, I don't know why there's a space between those two. And then I, he, she, it went. It would be I, he, she, it had gone. So continuing the general rules of verb forms, part 2, the subjunctive mood. Number 5, in an adverb clause that expresses a situation contrary to fact, use were instead of was for first and third person singular. When the clause begins with the word if, use would as the helping verb for the verb in the main clause, never in the adverb clause. Rule number 6, contrary to fact clauses normally begin with the words if, as if, or as though. Be careful since some if clauses describe real possibilities. Oh, I'm going to get into adverb clauses right after this slide, but the last general rule for verb forms is the time to use if I were, if he were, if she were, if it were, is when you can say it at once. When you can say at once, but I am not, but he, she, it is not. In these sentences, the verb in the main clause will have would or its contraction apostrophe D as its helping verb. So now for the adverb clause, one common error in the situation is the use of would have in the adverb clause. If he would have paid with cash, he could have gotten the box for cheaper. The correct verb in this case is always the word had. It would be if he had paid with cash, he could have gotten the box for cheaper. Never use the words would have as helping verbs in an adverb clause beginning with if, also known as an if clause. So then we have some quick practice sentences for verb form part 2, subjunctive mood. So sentence number 1, the chameleon wished that the cricket holds still. It would be the chameleon wished that the cricket would hold still. Sentence number 2 is if I was given $1 for every homework I've handed in, I'd be a millionaire. This new correct sentence would be if I were given $1 for every homework I handed in, I'd be a millionaire. This relates back to this adverb clause slide in general with if clauses and saying would have and beginning. So never use would have as helping verbs in an adverb clause beginning with if. So then sentence number 3, Nick wishes that this exercise will be done soon. The correct sentence would be Nick wishes that this exercise were done soon. And you might notice a pattern from looking at all of the correct sentences that were is often the verb that is used the most in the correct form of the sentence. It's really just a coincidence that 4 out of the 5 sentences I have here can be corrected with replacing the verb with were, but just make sure you're keeping in mind just the general rules that we've discussed and that apply to the subjunctive mood. Sentence number 4, does Alfred still wish that he would be fluent in Latin? It would be correct to say, does Alfred still wish that he were fluent in Latin? And then the last sentence, Larry treats James as though he was an airhead, but he is not. The correct sentence would be, Larry treats James as though he were an airhead, but he's not. So that concludes the recap for today's lesson. I know it's a bit short just because in the previous recap lessons we've been going over 2, and this is just recapping lesson 7, which does still cover a lot of material. I just wanted to make sure that I give more of a brief overview rather than repeating the lesson, because then it wouldn't be a recap. So again, if you have any questions, do leave them in any comments, or just you can also refer back to the full lesson 7 because I have examples for each tense, and it's just much more clear when you have multiple examples and explanations following it. But I hope that this recap helped, and then starting next week we're going to be moving on to a new lesson, lesson 8. But for now, that's everything. So thank you guys, and if you have any questions, do leave them and I'll get to them. Thank you.